afternoon, everyone, and thank you for being here today. The topic of community design and land planning impacts all of us, from the roads we drive and the services we rely on, to housing, open space, infrastructure, and the overall quality of life in our region. These conversations involve many different perspectives, priorities, and experiences, which is exactly why they're important to have these conversations together as a community. During our February Signature Series conversation about housing and the missing middle, we reconfirmed two important realities facing our region. First, our regional growth rate remains relatively modest at approximately 0.8% annually. And second, that we continue to face a shortage of attainable housing for our essential workforce, particularly households earning between 60% and 120% of the area median income. Today's discussion builds on that conversation by exploring how planning and land use decisions help shape the communities we live and work in, and how thoughtful planning can help balance housing, infrastructure, environmental considerations, open space, and long-term community goals. As you saw with our save the dates that are on each of your chairs, we will be talking about water at our August Signature Series program. We know and recognize that water is very important to all of us. Yes. We're grateful that you've taken your time to join us and be a part of this conversation. At this time, it's my pleasure to introduce today's moderator, Patrick Kuykendall.
Good afternoon, everybody. Usually I'm in front of the mic at KYCA and I'm listening to Blair going, and live from the studios at 500 Henry Street, it's a KYCA afternoon, live from the media studios. We're not doing that today. But is it okay if I deviate just a little bit, Ron? Is that okay? Hey, you know, this last weekend was Memorial Day, honoring our fallen police officers. This is Memorial Day for our troops. How about we stand and say the Pledge of Allegiance in honor of our great nation? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. All right. So, we're going to go ahead and introduce our panelists. We'll start with Bryn and work our way down.
Can you hear me? Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Bryn Stobler. I'm the planning manager at Yavapai Plan. We are the regional planning organization that addresses transportation, regional roadways, public transportation, transportation choices, trails, conservation. So we've got our fingers in a little bit of all of it. I started my career here 30 years ago, working for Yavapai County Planning and Zoning. I worked in zoning originally, so that's more the regulatory end of land use, but later in my career I had the opportunity to go to work for a private development company, the M3 companies. You may be familiar with the communities that we created, Prescott Lakes, American Ranch. They were the original developers of Wickenburg Ranch. Lots of great taking the paintbrush to the canvas and working with masterful ideas for master plan communities, and some of you may even live in those communities today, so happy to be a part of that. Later, I went to work for the city of Prescott as the community development director. That was during COVID. That was fun. Since then, I returned to transportation planning. I worked at SIMPO before the city, and SIMPO is now Yavapai Plan, and have been happy to be involved in the transportation network and the access for all to transportation options. So thanks for having me.
Okay, John.
Good afternoon. Can you hear me? It's not often that I get to sit up on stage with a microphone, so gotta let the nerves wear off a little bit. My name is John Carlson. I'm president of Espiritu Loci Incorporated. We are a land planning firm. Thank you. We're a land planning firm. We've been planning communities in Arizona for over 25 years, doing the same projects since I've been in school. I graduated in college, and so the projects we work on are long-term. We think generationally when we're working on projects. A couple of them include DC Ranch and Verado. If you ever have a chance to go down and tour a couple of these communities, they are really designed for every stage of life. They're designed for the pedestrian, they're designed with open space in mind, And they're really great communities to kind of get the feel and nature of what we like to create. The Espiritu Loci is half Latin and half Spanish for spirit of the place, and so we try to incorporate that with everything that we do with our plan.
All right, next we have Patricia.
Okay, so I'm Patricia Betzhold. I'm a retired executive director of design for facilities for Kaiser Permanente. Some of you may be familiar with them. They're a nationwide healthcare network. My responsibilities included overseeing the design and construction of everything from local clinics to specialty centers in Lancaster to mega hospitals in San Diego and Los Angeles. And working with the local municipalities, working with the actual clients, that for Kaiser, our mission was to provide healthcare, equal healthcare for everyone in the community. And so we were in Orange County, but we were also in places like Victorville on the other end of the spectrum. And so I took great pride in the mission that we had. And I think that's what influenced me once I retired to become more active in my community. And since moving here a few years ago, my community has now expanded to this whole valley. I feel that we're all very interconnected and interdependent. I've met people and joined groups from all over, and I think we have a lot in common, and look forward to work some more. So as an advocate for the community and as an organizer for responses, I guess you could say, to certain things that happen that people aren't happy with, I feel very fulfilled, and it's not even feeling like a second job, even though it keeps me super busy. Thank you.
All right, Kimberly.
All right. Is this on? Yep. We should have maybe tested first. I'm Kim Schoenig with the Nature Conservancy. I know some of you. It's exciting to be here and get to talk with you all. I work with the Nature Conservancy. I've been in Chino Valley for about 19 years, and I came here to work for the Conservancy with a focus on water. And so my first project was actually a pronghorn study. So I have been sort of walking that line between land use planning and water and agriculture over the last couple decades to really think about how do we protect the environment, but also work within these communities and understand how communities grow and develop in a way that can benefit or at least reduce harm to the natural environments that we're in. So thank you all for coming today, and I think learning about land use planning. I'll try not to talk too much about water, although I do love that topic. So yeah, I think that's enough about me.
All right, and
Actually,
Ariana, please.
one more, I forgot my other thing. I have bullets.
Okay, you got bullets.
So the Nature Conservancy, sorry, I should tell you what we are. We are a global nonprofit. The Nature Conservancy has been around since 1954. We started with a very focused effort on land acquisition and protecting land. So some of you may have been to a preserve that we own, Ramsey Canyon, Patagonia, there's several. But here in the Verde, we actually have very few land holdings, and we focus more on community partnership and building relationships. So if you think of us as a land owning organization, realize that we are a lot more than that. Now we'll be done.
And now Ariana.
Hello, my name is Ariana Herzog. I am the Habitat Program Manager out of the Cayman region for Arizona Game and Fish. I've been with Game and Fish for a little over 2 years now, and a big portion of my job is working kind of at that intersection between development and conservation. I talk with a lot of developers on the landscape and pass along best management practices to help mitigate impacts on wildlife.
All right, so we've seen a lot of people out there texting their friends to come up because they're late and tell them they need to hurry. But everybody go ahead and pull out your cell phone real quick because you're going to need it. Everybody pull it out, come on. And now Kim's going to give you a little overview on why you're going to need your phone or your mobile device.
Hi, good afternoon everyone. My name is Kim Beard. and I'm running the technological side of things for the presentation. The reason that Pat said that you need your cell phone is because this is also on all of your chairs. If you flip it around, so there's save the date for the next one where we talk about water, and then if you flip it around, this exact same code is on there. So if you scan this code, it takes you to a web browser platform called Slido. So you could use that one. Here we go. We will have some interactive questions, and we're going to do a tutorial here. You get to try it out here in just a second, where you get to some questions live, and we'll be able to see how people feel about certain things or how much they know about a certain thing. And then additionally, there's a Q&A. That's the first page that pops up. So you'll see Q&A, and then you'll see the word polls. So you're going to want that polls thing here in just a second. But the Q&A is so that if we see questions from the audience, this kind of keeps it rolling along. Submit your question. Remember to leave it in the form of a question like Jeopardy. I do get some statements, which is nice, but I will be moderating the questions up here. It needs to be a question, and if you're monitoring that, as soon as I see questions that seem like they would be a good question to ask, I will approve it. You'll be able to see it on that Q&A frame, that screen on your phone, and if you like it, I think there's a little heart icon. That's basically you voting for it. So rather than having 54 of the same question, just keep an eye on it. If you really want a question answered, we're monitoring how many of those are getting those likes so that we can pass that to Pat so that he can present that to the panel. So we'll be keeping an eye on it. Not all of your questions will be answered, I'm sorry. But we do want this to be interactive without having to kind of run around, give a microphone to an audience member, and then it kind of devolve into, just a lot of questions. Whereas we can get those questions, you can like it because you really want it answered, and then we'll try and pass those on. So let's give a little tutorial. Again, if you didn't get this QR, it is on the back of your save the date, so hold on to that, but also you can scan it on the back. This is the question, and it's about to go live. So, ready? And go. So it should be under polls, and you just type it in, and this is a fun thing called a word cloud. So as people enter those in, you can see it on the screen live. Isn't that fun? Isn't that exciting? Isn't that beautiful technology? Hey, that's cool. Thank you, that's all I wanted. So remember, throughout the presentation, have your phone out. You can ask questions, you can monitor them, vote for them, and then we will have polls just like this where it'll be multiple choice or whatever so that you can answer some questions and we can get some feedback from the audience directly. So it's like a game. I hope you have fun.
Thank you. All right, did you guys figure it all out? Okay, we did pretty good up there. We got the city of Prescott, we got Yavapai County, PV, Verde Valley, Chino represent. Okay. We got Phoenix Mayor, Dewey, Yavapai County. Not a bad turnout. Did anybody not get it? Anybody need help? Okay, so as we mentioned today is about land planning, and water is going to be the next one, so make sure you got that on your calendar for August 25th, the water series. But land planning, and when I first asked to do this, land planning was a big thing. We look at subdivisions. We look at planning, how does planning take place? And you've got the experts up here you're going to be able to ask questions to, and they're going to give you a lot of information. But land planning is such a big topic as we go under conservation, as we go into open space. So I'm going to go ahead and turn it to Bryn and John, and they're going to go through some of these to kind of get us well informed into the discussion.
I'll take the lead. Yep. So land planning means a lot of things to a lot of people. In reality, when we look at land planning on our side in the private sector, we're looking at it as a process to implement a vision. It's the framework. How are we going to do it? What is it that we want to implement? What is it for? And so a lot of the elements that we look at when we're land planning are growth, population decline. How do we want to accommodate that? We're looking at the environment and the natural resources and economics, and are they stable or not stable? Is there a way that we want to make them stable for our communities? Are there areas of the public realm that we see of value that we want to conserve, that we want to enhance? and then looking at land uses and the relationships and the densities. You know, are we in a monoculture type atmosphere where everything is the same? Or are we in a permaculture type atmosphere where we want to slow it, sink it, and spread it? These are kind of big ideas that we look at when we're in the process of land planning. But what land planning helps us do is understand our infrastructure and our needs. And then it also kind of lays out expectations for where or how things will or will not develop as we go. There's a hierarchy to it, so the state actually lays out the processes, the regulations, and the standards that we need to adhere to when it comes to land planning. There's kind of the big picture version first, which I'm calling land planning. It's more of a regional look at it. It's the broad brush look. We're not in the detail of an individual site, but we're now looking in an airplane, say, 25,000 feet. It could be larger for a county because they're covering more land. It could be smaller for a city or a town because they're covering less land. But this is broad stroke. What's the big idea for our circulation? What's the big idea for our open space corridors? What's the big idea for our core in our residential areas? And so that...
John, we're going to you speak into your mic just a little more. Appreciate it.
Thank you. So that really falls into something that's the guiding documents of general plans and comprehensive plans. The next stage of that, stage 2, is site planning. And this is really in the regulatory realm of land use or planning and land use. And this is where zoning falls in. This is when we get into the granular detail of how things come together. How wide is the road? Where's the building set? Where are the setbacks? Is there parking? Is that meeting the height requirements, the lot coverage? All those regulatory details get covered in the site planning and kind of step 2, if you will, of the nested hierarchy. So where do we find our vision? The vision is found or documented in our comprehensive plans and our general plans. The two are very close, one and the same. The county refers to them as a comprehensive plan. Towns and cities refer to them as a general plan. These are updated every 10 years. The state requires them. They go through a public process when they're drafted, often led by the local jurisdiction, the municipality. They'll send out invites, they'll hold open houses, they'll ask for input, they'll create a draft, they'll share the draft, they'll ask for more input, run surveys, take all of what they can into account. They're really building consensus, and that consensus is where do we want to go as a town, or as a city, as a county. That then gets presented to Planning Commission. Planning Commission then makes a recommendation to Council. Council then approves or doesn't approve. Once it's approved, then it goes to the voters to ratify. So the comprehensive plan, general plan process is the document that provides our vision, and it goes through a long public process and renewed about every 10 years. Within the document, the state requires certain elements of the vision to be included. It's the values. What do we as a community value? What are the land uses that we're looking at? What are the open space, parks and rec that we value, that we want to protect, that we want to enhance, that we want to put in certain locations? What's the size, the scale? The transportation is a big one, the circulation. This helps for planning roadways, routes into town, routes out of town, and also relates a lot to land use. Because the market will really drive where retail will go, and retail will always go where there's major intersections. And the roads will also drive where people don't go. And so if there's not a road there, then they can't get there. And so they kind of play hand in hand. The general plan also is responsible for looking at housing and growth. Right now, Arizona is a growing state. Every community in the state, there might be a handful that aren't growing. But the general plan is looking at existing conditions and future conditions, and the expectation is to figure out how do we want to handle the growth? Where do we want to locate it? Where is it appropriate? Where is it not appropriate? And then along with that, economic development, the cost of development, and education. Looking just at land use as kind of the categories, land use itself is really broadly based in 4 categories: residential, commercial, open space, and agriculture. There can be some fine details and some additional information in there, but those are really kind of the big 4. You'll also see up there circulation. While not a land use, it is heavily influencing where the land uses are located. Within the residential, there's usually categories, subcategories, ranging from low density, medium density, and high density. In commercial, there's often industrial and office and retail, mixed use maybe included in there. And then open space, of course, we get our parks, our plazas, our recreational fields, and our conservation areas. And then in agriculture, farming and ranching are the most common. In our general plan and these land uses, the state does not allow private property to have the right to less than one dwelling unit per acre. So even though there's something that's agricultural or farm, they still have rights for development as they move forward. In circulation, I kind of jumped that, but really there's kind of three big categories: pedestrian, bicycle, and vehicular, and trying to weave all of those in there in the general plan. I know Bryn has a heck of a lot more detail to include on some of these finer grain uses.
Wonderful. Thanks, John. So we're going to jump a little bit into those individual categories and get a little bit more detailed. Residential, as we all know, demographics kind of drive what our residential development looks like. We know that here in Yavapai County, in Prescott proper, it looks a lot different than it looks out in suburban Prescott Valley. In rural Chino Valley, it looks a lot different than it looks in downtown Dewey Humboldt. So development is driven by the housing types that people seek, and that tends to dictate where population resides. Housing choices affect land use. In the municipal environment, housing is a lot denser. We like the concept of infill development because we want those properties that are vacant, that are around other developed properties to become useful. That's one of the primary strategies to address the housing issue that we're all facing. Looking at infill development and things like accessory dwelling units, adding a dwelling unit to an already existing residential parcel is a definite tool to increase our housing availability. So healthy communities really, they offer options for different sized households, for different demographics, and different housing choices. If you like the rural lifestyle, then chances are you're going to be situated in a Dewey Humboldt rural environment, a Chino Valley rural environment. Even the unincorporated county has so many opportunities for rural development. So residential is something that we all see in our daily lives. It registers across our horizon as these are the housing choices that people make individually. I think recently we've seen a lot more multifamily evolving in the central Yavapai area and the Quad Cities area because of the need for transitional housing, that middle housing that's missing for our workforce. So interesting to watch how things have developed over time. I live in a South Prescott neighborhood that I've been in the same house since 1999, walkable to the plaza. I like downtown living. I grew up very rural on 40 acres and a hobby farm. My parents were very into the rural lifestyle. So there's appreciation for all of that. Moving on to commercial, I think we all recognize commercial crops up where access, utilities, and clientele or customer base resides. The base of that is the circulation, is the transportation component. Commercial areas thrive where there's good accessibility, where there's great visibility, and where the population is circulating. Have you ever driven by a commercial property that's been recycled into many different uses? I drove by one on 89 through the Dells the other day, and I thought, why doesn't anything ever go in that spot, right? It's a commercial property. It's been a number of different things. It's just not situated for good commercial traffic. While it's on a state route that gets a lot of attention and a lot of congestion, it isn't really a convenient place for a commercial area for consumerism. So those things need to be considered when commercial properties are developed, and I think that's why we have central commercial cores, we have industrial parks, which is another aspect of commercial development. We want these things to be buffered from our residential spaces. That's a natural inclination, it's a human inclination. But we also have to consider economic viability. We have to consider support and circulation to our business owners. We have to consider foot traffic, tourism. There's a lot going on with commercial as well. Moving on to open space. This is something that is top of mind for so many people in our region. We live in an incredibly beautiful landscape. We all want to see those things preserved. Our natural resources, our water, our wildlife. So open space is a way to not only facilitate that conversation, those protective actions that we can take to preserve and appreciate our open spaces, but let's also consider that it looks different from place to place. In a master plan community, open space is a requirement. Most jurisdictions operate off of about 25% open space for a subdivision plat. People get really frustrated because that doesn't look like a green space corridor. It could look like a drainage retention pond. It could be a green space and a small pocket park within a master plan or even a larger park facility. But oftentimes that 25% calculation is determined by things that need to happen with infrastructure. So let's appreciate that a master plan developer doesn't always have the ability to cluster development to one side or another and leave those open spaces really depicted as open spaces. They have to become functional in some cases. And that's very much more common in the master plan environment and the denser housing environment of municipalities. So moving on to agriculture. These are our original master parcels, right? Every rural area that ever had agriculture as a base activity, development sprang from that. We want to appreciate our ranchers, our large parcel owners, those folks who have been in the agriculture game for decades, even a century in Arizona. Agriculture is the base of so much when it comes to how development evolves. We appreciate those wide open rural spaces. Human nature is to fight against the development of those open spaces, and agriculture is kind of the core of that. And oddly, in Arizona, we've had a lot of agriculture that has been the beginning of communities. In a dry desert place, we have an amazing amount of agriculture still happening. When I worked in zoning, agriculture was one of the exempted activities. So large parcel owners that had agricultural activities could come to the zoning division at the county and receive a special exemption for their tax status, and those were processed through the zoning division. So agricultural uses are very foundational to all of our development patterns. I think we all appreciate when we still see an undisturbed ag parcel, and we want to always be able to see those things. It's a question for us in Arizona how long that will be feasible based on water. And finally, circulation. So important. None of these places can be gotten to without a viable regional roadway network. And that's actually the planning space that I work in now and have most recently. That includes highway, regional roadways, bicycle, pedestrian, that's known as multimodal, giving people choices to get to places by other than their personal own vehicle. We live in a very vehicle-centric environment here. Regionally, we have a lot of rural spaces. We need our vehicles, but we also, in the denser, more metropolitan aspects, urban environments, we want to make sure that people have transportation choices, that they have the ability to opt into public transportation if that's a help, that they have the ability to bicycle to work safely, utilizing our roadway system. So nothing in land use planning happens without a strong circulation network. And subsequent to that, we'll go ahead and move to the map. This is just one example. You guys have probably heard of the functional classification of roadways. This is one map that identifies letter grades, basically A through F, for how regional roadways are operating. And one of the jobs of the Metropolitan Planning Organization, Yavapai Plan, is to assess that every 5 years by creating what we call the General Plan of Transportation, which is our long-range transportation plan. It's required by the federal government of all MPOs to have this long-range vision, to look forward 25 years and take into account all of the pending and future development, and make sure that the roadways are operating at a functional classification that keeps people moving. One of the issues with that is that, as a general rule, we're about 10 years or more behind where we need to be in infrastructure implementation. We're always planning it, we're always identifying the priorities, but what do we have? A huge funding gap to deliver projects, And oftentimes political will enters into that as well, and we just can't move projects forward based on their popularity or not. So very critical to land use planning is the circulation network and all that comes with how we get to places.
Thank you, John and Bren. Next, we'll have Patricia.
Okay, so we're going to have some focus today on making sure people understand terms. So one of the terms here is land use versus zoning. What is the difference? So land use is actually a broad policy that helps establish what sort of development should happen and where, while zoning, in that case, will dictate what you can actually build on that project or on that parcel, and what kind of functions can take place on that site. And we'll get into that in a little bit more. As far as timing and process, you're going to see land uses in your general plan or your comprehensive plan. That is something that, for example, all of you before buying a home should be checking into. What are the approved uses for the land next door to you, behind you, et cetera? And how would those be applied? And on the zoning side, you won't really see a zoning pop up until you're actually putting together a subdivision or developing some other sort of commercial property, et cetera. That's when you're digging into zoning, where it gives you a lot of specifics that you have to meet for whatever particular use that you have. When it comes to development standards, the land use will describe patterns, et cetera, that sort of focus on compatibility. What uses are next to each other? Is the private property next door protected from the use that you might be suggesting? And when it comes to zoning, it gets very specific. It gets into your setbacks. How far back from the road does your front door have to be? How far away do you have to be from your neighbor? How many stories can you build on that site, et cetera, et cetera. So, in the big picture, land use is a policy map, whereas zoning is a regulation, a regulatory tool. And on the public side, the primary purpose of land use planning is to balance economic growth, social equity, and environmental conservation. And I'll quote, to ensure human needs are met without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their own needs. And a lot of you have been involved with concerns about that. And the job of the municipality and the county, in this case, is anticipating population shifts. 10 years ago, they projected that our growth would be a lot more than it is today, for example. So in generating the general plan, which the refresh is required every 4 years by the state of Arizona, that refresh of what our population target is critically important because a lot of organizations, including YMAP, use that to project what the need for roads are, what our water needs are going to be in the future by the management plan, and other things as far as anticipating, so we're not surprised by either not enough growth or too much growth for what we're specifically planning. As far as environmental protection, the other job of the municipalities in the county is to safeguard our natural resources, especially watersheds and wildlife habitats, making sure they're protected for the future. And planning public services, as Bren said, and looking at the big picture about what's going to be needed in the future. I'll bring up the Big Chino, for example. So maybe 10 years ago or 20 years ago when the idea came up, they would have started planning a giant pipe going to there to pull water in, but as yet that hasn't happened. But that's an example of looking into the future and trying to anticipate what our needs are going to be. But again, that's tempered by what actually happens in that period of time. And ultimately, the focus of land use is to enhance quality of life for the people who live here. Oh. I think we skipped a slide, but that's okay. So we may have skipped a couple of slides. So anyway, the limits of zoning. Again, it's establishing some very specific requirements. You have a commercial building and you want to put up a sign. There's a zoning control over that. You want to paint your house purple. There may be a zoning restriction depending on what town you live in. Rights of ways, drainage, utility improvements, building size, all of those are set aside by the Arizona state law to allow local jurisdictions to establish those details in the zoning. So let's just say you have a problem with some type of zoning that's impacting your private property. Well, it's not the state of Arizona that put together those specifics. It's actually your local municipality or county, if you live in the county. And that's really why it's important when the town or the city or the county is working on those things, and you'll see, hey, we're going to refresh the zoning ordinances, et cetera, that you actually read them, even though they're quite tedious, and understand them. One example, for example, is one town here wanted to put ADUs in. Well, once people understood what an additional dwelling unit was, there was quite a bit of reaction to it. For those of you who don't know what it is, it's basically putting a small habitat for a person or persons to rent in your backyard. And finally, the town settled on allowing that only on larger parcels, because if you're living in a parcel or an area where you have a small backyard and somebody has to walk past the side of your house to get in the backyard to go into their rental unit, that means you're going to have strangers walking into your backyard. And you may not think that's a good idea. But again, getting involved with your local municipalities, paying attention to what the council's putting together and reviewing is critically important, because once it's in place, you have a really big problem. But the focus of the intent of the state with zoning is to protect public health, safety, and general welfare. So they're doing that for us. So that means that we really need to be involved as a community. And it also does other things like divide the land into distinct divisions, et cetera, how big is a parcel, et cetera, et cetera. Some of you may live in a municipality that modified the size of allowable parcels for houses. So houses could be placed closer together. And there's pros and cons in that, and I won't go into them, but you can ask me about them later. Zoning is also seen as the enforcement arm for land use. So in other words, land use is a policy, but the zoning itself is actually an ordinance. It's actually a law. So you can discuss policy all day long, but if it's a law, you're going to have a challenge dealing with it. And I think we're ready for the next question, unless those slides reappear.
All right, Patricia, thank you so much. So we're going to have the next question. Everybody get your phones out. What are the reasons that people choose to move here? And you're going to pick 3. Go ahead. Not many answers yet, but they're coming in hot. There we go. Culture, small town living, outdoor lifestyle, ideal climate, moving up. Outdoor lifestyle is taking the lead. Ideal climate, climate again. Getting close. Say again? Well, less development's not getting much, and rural lifestyle and space coming in slow. Lifestyle and climate. Come on, we need about 35 more people. Culture and community's kind of staying stagnant too. Lifestyle, come on. Lifestyle, climate. Small town living, look at that. It's a three-way. Come on, we need 10 more. Lifestyle's leading. Climate, 10 more, come on. We're at 77. Climate, lifestyle, how about 3 more? Let's get to 80. Anybody want to raise their hand? Okay, so it looks like ideal climate, outdoor lifestyle, and small town living has really taken the bulk of it, where culture, community, rural lifestyle and space, and less development is kind of coming in from the bottom. So let's go ahead and go back to Patricia.
Okay. All right, so planning for a healthy community, what does that look like? How do you balance housing, infrastructure, and environment, and open space, conservation, and wildlife corridors? Next. Okay. So the goal of community design is to create healthy and inclusive living spaces for all community members, and I want to underline the word all. So really, to make this happen, you really have to get community planners, architects, local government, and community members. And when we say community members, we mean people who actually live in that community. Very, very important. We talk about bringing in new folks and everything else, and that's great. But when people are already established in a community, it's critically important to get their input. Part of that reason is they understand the community they live in, and they understand what their needs and the challenges are that need to be satisfied by whatever planning that's going on. It's also critically important, as we just did, to look at what do you value in your community? Why are you here? Why do you get up in the morning? Why do you come to Central Arizona? So it's important to listen to diverse perspectives, and to also make decisions together on what is going to happen in the community and how to shape its environment. And so the thing is your general plan for your town or city most likely includes a section that talks about citizen committees. And in the particular town that I was living in, PV, it talks a lot about how important it is to get a group of people together to help the town understand what it is that the community wants. And we're not talking about some of these surveys that go out and maybe they capture 2%. 2% is not enough. And it's also rather random. And some areas in your community, there's a lot of diversity about whether people really respond to surveys, and some areas don't respond to surveys, and what you get is kind of a lopsided result. So it takes a little work to get together the right group of people. So what does a healthy community look like? Well, it's kind of surprising. We were looking at urban communities versus rural communities. And of course, everybody has a different idea about the specific house they build in. But when you look at what people are looking for, there is a strange confluence on people wanting the same things. In other words, in a urban community, they may want pocket parks, but then they want views of large natural areas. They want walking trails with views. And they want neighborhoods with dedicated, permanent, undisturbed natural space. I'm sure that sounds very familiar to a bunch of you. But when you look at what rural residents want, they may say it a little bit different, but what they want protected natural resources and wildlife habitats. They want scenic quality, rural character, and houses surrounded by open space, like we see now in Chino Valley, for example. But yet, so one is the houses are closer together, and the other one is the houses are further apart, but they seem to have a fundamental need to have that same environment or have access to a natural environment in their space. So I was quite surprised seeing that. Both want sustainable building practices, But those, when you look at the top things that they ask for, they're all variations on the same theme. Next slide. Okay, so you have these fundamental needs for how the space feels around you, et cetera, et cetera. But depending on your stage in life, you also have to coordinate that with the basics, right? You got air, water, food, shelter on the bottom, jobs and healthcare, community, elder care and other services, and for some, creativity and opportunities. I say that because it's not a secret that the majority of folks here are retired. So that's all critically important. What I think may be missing is that some folks come here and maybe they came here and saw a piece of property on the weekend and purchased it, and then they came back and realized we don't have a Macy's, right? Or, right? Or that they might have to stand in line at the grocery store because they came from a really small town, and and plus, when they were younger, let's face it, we're all seniors here, me, I'll just talk about me, I'm a senior. When do me and my husband like to go out? We go out first thing in the morning and go to the grocery store. Guess when everybody else goes? They all go in the morning, and by noon, even the Costco parking lot is pretty empty, okay? That's how we roll. I mean, that just happens. And whereas the other people who are working for a living, raising their kids, they've got a completely different schedule. But it does mean we're going to see a line. But if you go in the afternoon, there's nobody there. So sometimes, we just need to kind of think about those things and consider what we're willing to trade in to get what maybe we think we want, but we all have to make our own choices. But hopefully everybody's able to put together those fundamental needs to have good views, to be able to see natural space, the wide open plains. Many of you may have come from a metropolitan area, I know I did, and you have to balance that out with, well, what price do we have to pay? And I know that Kim's going to talk about that a little bit later. Next. So what is open space? So it's very interesting. If you take a look at the ordinances.
Patricia.
Oh, sorry.
Yep, that goes into the next one. I think we have a question now.
Oh.
Not yet. Okay, sorry about that. Keep going.
Oh, I'm sorry. Okay. So anyway, what is open space? So if you look at where you live and take a look at their definition of open space, it will vary widely. Some of them, are think it's conserved open space for natural resource protection, to natural landscapes of scenic beauty, to agriculture, to protecting it and making it available for future use without defining the future use. So you have to really pay attention to definitions when you're reviewing town policy because it does vary, and this has an enormous impact on what you think you have in your backyard and how long it might be there. So basically, the other couple of definitions that you have to watch out for is the definition of a park versus open space. Now, a park is a designated, maintained public space meant for active recreation. That includes ball fields, basketball fields, sports fields. While open space, the classic explanation for open space is it's a largely undeveloped natural land used for conservation or passive recreation, like hiking, bird watching. In other words, you're not messing with it. And the other two that are tricky are conservation versus preservation. Conservation is the sustainable use and management of natural resources to prevent exploitation. So that's kind of a mouthful. But basically, they're retaining it, they're conserving it. But that doesn't mean things aren't happening there that you might not expect as far as a natural open space. Preservation, on the other side, is pretty hardcore. It's actually protecting nature from any human use or development. Now I'll pass it on to Kim.
All right, and I'm gonna try to be brief so we get to a question and answer time. So I'm gonna highlight this Verde Watershed report card project. I brought a few. It's up there on the screen. This is our 2025 version of a watershed report card. It focuses on the Verde Watershed, which includes Chino Valley, Big Chino, a big chunk of our area. However, it doesn't include Dewey Humboldt or the Agua Fria, but Mary's here, and she can talk a lot about the Agua Fria if y'all have questions about that. So I will just highlight this is very focused on the Verde, but it gives you some ideas about what are we looking at when we think about what makes a healthy watershed, right? And a healthy community is part of a healthy watershed. You know, we need to make sure that communities have access to jobs, to housing, employment, good education. Those kinds of things are taken care of before we're saying, hey, we also need access to parks and open space and wildlife corridors. Because if you can't meet the basic needs that people have, you cannot meet the conservation needs as well. So when we're thinking about conservation, these are the things that we're thinking about. Water, obviously water is really important. Clean water, available water, water that we can access. So if there's water and it costs you, I don't know, $75 an hour to pump it out of the ground, that's probably not affordable. So also needs to be affordable and accessible. We think about habitats, so upland habitat, those big wide open. Who's driven up the 89 lately? And you've seen where the juniper trees are getting cut down, right? And you might think like, why are we cutting down those trees? Well, those trees are not great there. Those trees are using water. They're also blocking habitat for pronghorn. That's naturally meant to be a grassland. So opening up that space, doing projects to reduce sediment transport that improves the quality of the river. Protecting our riparian areas, so having good bird habitat. You guys have seen Watson Woods? Who saw Watson Woods in the 90s? Yeah, it's like a lot better bird habitat now, right? So good riparian areas, and then native fisheries is kind of the other place we look when we think about aquatic habitats. So those are just some of the ways we're looking at it. This report card was collaboratively developed with community members and agencies. In 2020, we did the first report card. This is our 2025 update. If you were not involved in 2025, watch out for 2030. It'd be great to have more participation from the Upper Verde watershed. If you go to the EcoHealth report cards, you can find the Verde watershed report card and be able to compare scores. I also have a couple copies up here. One of the things in here that we talk about are what are the things we can do to have a healthy watershed. And there's so much of the things we're talking about here today. So we can go to the next slide. Perfect. There's a nice picture. I think Walt might have taken that picture. Thanks, Walt. So as we think about healthy riparian habitats, who's seen the bald eagles at Watson Woods? Right? So when we think about conservation and we think about the ecology of our environments, it doesn't have to be separate from our home. So I just wanted to mention a few of the things that we're working on in terms of how we're integrating conservation and land use planning. So one of the ways that we do that is through strategic land acquisition with partners. So when you think about state parks, there's a recent acquisition for state parks. I know some people want that state park open tomorrow, and it's a little frustrating. It won't be tomorrow, it won't be next year, it's gonna be a little while. It's gonna take time for that plan to happen. But we have to start now if we want a state park 5 years from now, 10 years from now. And so that kind of acquisition is something where the community came together and said, this would be much better as a state park than as a housing development. That doesn't mean a housing development's wrong, it just means in that place, this would be a much better use of that. There is a ranch just up from that state park, the Wells Family Ranch, that is protected by a conservation easement. A conservation easement allows a ranch to continue to be a working ranch, a working farm, but not to be developed. So it can't be subdivided, it can't be carved up into smaller parcels. It will always be a very large working ranch and landscape. Just on the other side of that is the headwaters of the Verde River. That is land owned and managed by Arizona Game and Fish Department. That's not managed for public recreation and access constantly. It's really set aside to protect that natural area. That's the best thing we can do there. So when we think about what's the right place for these parcels, how can they be protected, And not in a protected, like a keep people out of them way, but in a keeping them whole, keeping them intact, and being part of this ecosystem that makes a functional ecosystem and a place we want to live. Another thing I wanted to just mention is how we think about planning and how do we look at communities. So I live in Chino Valley. I drive through town and there's a really great square of state trust land, right? And there's pronghorn there and there's horses there, and that's really nice. It's not super great habitat. Just because the pronghorn happened to be there does not mean it's great habitat, right? And so how are we as a community going to think about development and infill? And infill comes up a lot because you see these big open spaces, you might really like them, but how are we going to plan to manage these places? Because if things are going somewhere, what's the right place for that to go? Infrastructure projects, so thinking about how we manage our water and our land use. One of the big determining factors for whether a community can recover effluent and be able to do recharge or reuse is proximity to their infrastructure system. So if you have a parcel you're developing and it's, I don't know, a half mile, a mile, 2 miles away from a sewer connect, you're not going to be collecting effluent. You're going to be putting in septic tanks, which brings up other challenges with water quality. So really thinking through how infrastructure connects to these communities and what we want this future to look like. So we at the Nature Conservancy kind of engage in all different aspects of conservation, from very open space, natural areas, parks and preservation, into things like conservation easements. So I have a couple handouts on easements for later if you're all interested. I also have a nice handout on kind of the Upper Verde and kind of what we think it needs to look like. That was a stakeholder-driven group as well. So I will stop there and turn it to Ariana.
Great, thank you. So this is a map of the local pronghorn herd and their range. They go as far north as Garland Prairie, and you can obviously see them down here and through Chino Valley. And I just kind of wanted to talk about the local wildlife that we see here and some of the recommendations that the department can make based off of their behaviors. So as you can see on the map, these active roads become a pretty stark barrier for pronghorn movement. And something about pronghorn, I guess there's a couple quirks to them, but they are a highly visual animal. So they've adapted to living on these big open grassland landscapes, and they're a prey animal. So they're constantly alert for these predator species that might be out there. So they are unlikely to venture into more dense habitats like the juniper forest that Kim was talking about, or being near developed communities because their open view shed is gone. So it's important to kind of remember their behavior when we make these recommendations and maintain these open spaces for their movement, because they, again, are a migrating species. So on top of them being highly visual, they also are pretty movement averse. They, again, are looking for predators on the landscape. So if they see movement, they're going to know, okay, I have to stay away from there, I got to get out of here. And so these big active roads with lots of moving cars, or a big city center with lots of people moving around, that's going to kind of turn pronghorn away. So it's just a couple of different things that we have to note when we're making recommendations to new developers in the area. One of the big suggestions that we have to constantly reiterate is when we're talking about fences. Pronghorn have the ability to jump, but they choose to go underneath fences. So they will walk an entire fence line looking for that opening to get on the other side of that fence. And so when we're talking about developing in this area, we often are talking about incorporating a smooth bottom wire for those fences and having it at least 20 inches off the ground to allow for that safe passage of pronghorn. So these are, again, just a couple of habits for these animals that we have to consider when we're making recommendations. You can go to the next couple slides. You can keep going until we see owls. Okay, so, pronghorn are kind of the poster child for this area, so we are always considering them in development, but there are a lot of other creatures out here that we have to keep in mind when we're talking about doing anything on the landscape. And burrowing owls, as their name suggests, they are living underground. They live in burrows. They share a habitat with pronghorn. They're going to be in grasslands typically. You can also see them in some rocky areas as well, but mostly you're going to find them in grasslands. And grasslands are unfortunately a great habitat for humans as well. It's a great place for us to start developing, and we call it shovel ready. But we, through the department, we are offering burrowing owl project clearance guidelines that recommend surveying prior to any sort of ground disturbance. And on top of that, if we find an active burrow, we require a minimum of a 100-foot buffer around those active burrows during any construction. So these are just like a couple examples of the things that we're passing along to developers. It's really not about stopping development, and Game and Fish really doesn't have that regulatory authority. We're here just to provide best available science and best management practices to help mitigate impacts on wildlife. So these are just a couple comments that we might make when we're talking to developers in the area.
All right, thanks, Ariana. Pull your phones out again. We're going to have another Slido question. I feel like I have a better understanding of land planning. All right, we got a lot of agrees out there. Still more agrees. Good job, panel. That means the information's getting out there. Keep agreeing. A few more? All right, so it looks like most people agree that land planning, you have a better concept. Let's go to another question. What best reflects your opinion about current land planning? Political ideologies, thoughtful and planned, occurs without public input, random and chaotic, and unsure. So thoughtful and planned is definitely leading the way. Some people think political ideologies are there. Occurs without public input. Few people feel that way. Some people are unsure, but it looks like thoughtful and planned are the majority. So let's go ahead and go into we're going to open up the panelist discussion. Remind the audience to submit questions in Slido. Right, Kim? Okay, so that's good to go. So the panelist discussion, we're going to talk about how are land discussions made in our community through the general plan, community, area plan, public process, cost consideration, development, feasibility, and zoning code. Go ahead, panelists. Who wants to go first?
I'll speak a little bit to the challenge for municipal and county planners, having headed up teams of city planners. They really have a difficult job. I know that as a customer at the counter, you bring your great idea, usually in on a napkin, and the first line of defense at the community development counter is somebody who has to really take your great idea and shove it into a code-shaped box. And what I mean by that is the code guides development. The staff doesn't make the code. The staff may be involved in developing codes as codes change, but the elected officials adopt codes, and then the staff is tasked with implementing them. So one of the most difficult things that happens with your great idea that you walk in with is you're met with this code-shaped box that the planner is tasked with putting your great idea into so that it meets all of those code provisions. That's the visualization I like to use when talking about the challenges of making great ideas happen in our development landscape, because the job of a city or county planner is to make sure that you're meeting all codes. If code is poorly written, or if code has not been updated in a long time, that can definitely impact the quality of development. So that's something that all jurisdictions are always thinking about. And code updates are arduous. They're not easy processes. So just a little bit of appreciation for those folks behind the counter who are trying to work with you in every possible way, but are limited by certain things.
Go ahead, Patrice.
So on the general plan a little bit, several of the municipalities have gone through that recently. Right now, I believe the county of Yavapai is working on a 3-year program to attempt to zone the county so that building and expansion isn't so happenstance. And I think we see examples of certain communities swallowing up a lot of land and somewhat straining the infrastructure. In other cases, I think the city of Prescott did a pretty long, extensive effort to bring the community in to working on the general plan, updating the general plan. Nothing's perfect, of course, and then some towns have sort of shortcutted the system a little bit where, for example, I won't name names, but you might find that their land use plan has not changed for 3 decades. And that's kind of not great for the residents of that particular town, especially when most of them voted for it without reading it. It was only 270 pages. I don't know why they didn't read it. But they voted to reduce the population target by over 40,000 people. And they thought that's what they were getting. That was not the case. But again, it goes back to community involvement and really attending those meetings, really understanding what is being put in there and making sure that the, I guess they call them commissioners of the plan, they appoint a group to actually put that together. It's a horrific amount of work, but it's critically important because that is the guideline for your municipality. And changes to it, major changes to it are quite onerous. If you don't like what they put together, you might have to go door to door and collect signatures for a referendum. I mean, it's a lot of work either way. Better to put the work in the beginning before the general plan is voted on, because it will go to your ballot, and you do vote on it, but you need to understand what it says. You know, from there, if you're satisfied with that, things are pretty straightforward, unless, of course, you haven't looked at the land use plan in there, and you don't realize that a piece of property you own, how it's going to be affected. But the whole purpose of the thing is to make sure we don't have incompatible uses. So your private property values are protected while still allowing some sort of compatible development to go in next door.
Kimberly, do you have a few?
Add, you know, sometimes there are the zoning regulations, there's very strict requirements, and there's other sections of the plan that talk about goals or character areas, and they might feel a little bit fluffier, and maybe you're not motivated to really work on those. But those areas can be really important for conservation. So who's read the Yavapai County Comprehensive Plan? Okay, come on, it's really good, okay? It's a great plan. I actually really like it. It has a lot of great information in there. The words that are in that plan are the words that we copy and paste into our funding proposals to do things like conservation easements, to do things like the state parks, to do projects for thinning and restoration. So those plans can influence a wider range of things than you realize. We have a conservation easement in Camp Verde. I know we're not talking about Camp Verde, but we were able to get funding to protect this very large, significant farm because the town plan recognized that agriculture was important. So sometimes when you see those words and you think, like, does this really matter? Do I really need to show up? Do I need to engage and acknowledge these other ideas? That's really your time. Like Patricia said, like, show up, have community engagement, voice your support for the things that really matter, and hopefully that's what can make it into that final plan, because even if it's not a regulatory requirement, it can be used as a funding proposal. It can be used to gain support. So I do really encourage, if you're going to come to the August section about water, read the county plan about water before you're here.
Okay, we're going to go ahead and move forward with the next side.
Hey, Pat, can I add to that one?
Okay.
Because Kim, I think you're spot on. Like, the general plan is the thing, the comprehensive plan is the thing to share the public vision, what we want as a community. As a private sector planner, I'm often also the bearer of bad news. We do lots of open houses, and we get lots of frowns when we go and do an open house. But we live in a capitalist society. Everything is run by if it pencils or doesn't pencil. Just because we want to have a grocery store at the corner doesn't mean we're going to get a grocery store at the corner. We have to make it work for infrastructure, we have to make it work for market, and we have to make it just pencil, period. You won't see a private sector landowner come and ask for zoning or rezoning or do a site plan if it simply doesn't work. And so as much as we love decision-making on the public side, on the private side, it's a whole different mathematical equation.
Appreciate you, John. So we went ahead and put another Slido question. To what extent do you believe the new development covers the cost of infrastructure and services needed to support it? So particularly covers the cost is about 60%, does not cover the cost, mostly covers the cost, unsure, and fully covers the cost. So I think most people believe that partially covers the cost when new development covers the cost of infrastructure and services needed to support it. So we do have a couple questions here. What is the deal with the Sundog connector?
What?
One more time. You want to hit that one, Bryn?
What is the deal? Well, about a year and a half to 2 years ago, about a year and a half ago, we closed out that planning process. It was about a 2-year process to examine a corridor that had been called out in planning documents since the mid to late 90s. That corridor happened to be pre-established by those former planning documents through the open space purchased area that was recently completed by the city of Prescott, the town of Prescott Valley, and the county from the state land department. I'm talking about the area that is westbound of Yavapai Hills. So open space that exists to the west of the developed Yavapai Hills. The roadway project was very unpopular. We heard from the community to a great extent, and we listened. They were most concerned about not only the unfortunate bisection of the open space by the roadway corridor, but also by the conservation elements, the wildlife, the preservation of that undisturbed area. And that actually caused then SEMPO, now Yavapai Plan, to turn the corner into a conservation planning process, to open a regional conversation about what we can do as transportation professionals, as land use planners, as residents, to observe, appreciate, and protect our natural resources, our wildlife, our open lands, our water. So greater appreciation gained by all through that process. Was it fun for the planners? No, it wasn't fun for the planners. We went back to our office and licked our wounds for a while. That's a tough one. Like, you do bring forward unpopular things, and that is just part of the planning discipline. It is to vet all options, all ideas, and some of those ideas have rolled forward through plan documents that are decades old. So there's always a reason to keep looking at a project, but for now, the political will and the community sentiment was not in support of Sundog Connector, therefore it is not moving forward.
All right, we're going to move to slide 40, the panelist discussion. What are the main ways development contributes to infrastructure, and where are the gaps? Impact fees, development agreements, taxation, game and fish preservation fund, or land conservation? Go ahead, Ariana.
So when I think about like the gap in infrastructure and development, I'm really thinking about how we need to include wildlife in that conversation. And it's not like a new concept. This has been, part of how we develop things for a while now. But Arizona Game and Fish offers a few different resources for how that can be a little bit easier for people. So first we have the environmental review tool, which is available for public use. It allows you to select an outline of a project area on a map and submit it, and in return you get a list of all of the species of greatest conservation need or federally listed species that are likely to intersect with your project area. So this can really inform what management decisions need to be made on the landscape prior to any construction to protect these federally listed species. And then on top of that, we have the Heritage Fund, which is dedicated to preserving, protecting, and enhancing Arizona's natural habitats. It receives funding through the Arizona Lottery, not from state general tax revenue. But these funds are divided into a few different programs, the largest of which is for sensitive habitat. So it's in an effort to really inventory, acquire, manage, and protect these sensitive habitats for threatened and endangered species. And these are just a couple of the tools that Arizona Game and Fish offers to help developers in their process for developing.
Anybody else have any panelist discussion on those topics? Okay, we're going to go ahead and move on. Why do some members of the public oppose new roads and future connections between communities? Looks like promotes additional development is the big one, and encroaches on wildlife and open space is in a pretty close second. Too expensive is there. That's a good topic. Okay, another panelist discussion. A common concern we hear is that planning infrastructure and corridors actually drives more development. In reality, planning doesn't create growth, it helps communities prepare for it and guide it more thoughtfully. Panelist?
So I'll go ahead and start because I've been spending a lot of time with a certain general plan. And again, I think that some planning is definitely good, but that planning needs to keep up to date with what the population growth is or isn't, as well as what the values of the community are. So for example, when I see in a certain general plan, circulation plan, that there's a possible freeway proposed to cross the valley to connect the 17 with the 40 going west, that gets my heart thumping because, of course, many of us moved here to get away from freeways. But other roads are definitely necessary and, again, connect us to where we need to be connected to. So I guess the big ask that I would have on behalf of the community is just to make sure that we are looking at where we're at and where we want to go, rather than just relying on some, quite frankly, outdated projections about what our growth is, especially concerning the topic that will be discussed at the next event in this series.
All right, so we have another question from the audience. Is annexation a good solution for future growth as it provides more control to the municipality to measure water use? Don't everybody jump at that question. Anybody want to take that on head to head?
I'll give you a partial answer. And I don't know if annexation is good or bad. That is not the world that I work in. But I will say, when we are planning for water infrastructure, how are we going to have drinking water supplies? How are we going to have sewer? Those kinds of challenges, when you're working in an undeveloped rural community that is under the jurisdiction of just the county, it's nearly impossible for them to do that planning. When you think about Paulden, anybody from Paulden? We didn't have that on the screen, right? Paulden is an interesting place. It's a lot of people, and there is more growth coming, but there's not an entity that is set aside to do planning there. In that case, you actually have a weird Chino Valley annexation that cuts up the 89. So I think sometimes annexation might feel like, hey, this isn't a good solution, or I don't want this, or this is more things, but it's also a planning venue for people to think about, because if you don't have a place to have a plan, you're not going to have a plan. It's very hard under something like a county plan scale to plan for high-density communities. So I don't know if it's good or bad, but I think from a conservation standpoint, it's hard to have a plan to do things if you have nobody to plan with. And as an organization that works statewide, countywide, where we can engage and support on planning, it's a lot better for us to be able to check in and know what people want.
All right, we're going to do the final Slido question. Which community is building the most new homes? And Prescott Valley looks like it's the winner in this group. Yavapai County, City of Prescott, low, and Chino Valley is not building. I've seen a few houses out there. So what you're going to see here with the graph, yellow is Prescott Valley, green is the City of Prescott, blue is the town of Chino Valley, red is Yavapai County, and the graph starts in 2016 and ends in March 2026. So you see the yellow Prescott Valley, the green is the city of Prescott, blue is the town of Chino Valley, and red is Yavapai County. Okay, we're going to go into our last panelist discussion. We're going to give each of them 30 seconds to make a comment about this panelist discussion topic. It's not whether we grow, it's how we grow. Growth in municipality versus county, what are the trade-offs? We'll start with Bryn.
Thanks, Pat. And I'm going to claim that quote. That is my quote. I have been saying that throughout most of my development career because no doesn't work, okay? Just saying no doesn't create good development, strong development, great ideas around development. When you only come from a place of no, you kind of give up your voice. And a lot of land development process is public and deserves your voice. So I guess it isn't whether we grow, because we know, I've been here 30 years, I've seen a lot of change. I've welcomed a lot of new residents, and I continue to do that because we live in a beautiful place and we understand why they're coming. Everybody's entitled to their opinion about whether they like that or not, but if you only say no to development, you really just give up your voice and how it happens. And there is a way to be a part of that process. So I would encourage everyone to be aware of that and don't just say no. Bring your voice.
John?
I'd say there is no one right answer when it comes to land planning. We all have choices. We all want trades. As we go through the life cycle of living, we've all lived in different settings. You know, whether it's our home with our parents, our moving out to our first apartment, getting our first place to rent, buying our first house, having a family, moving up in the house, downsizing in the house. These are all choices that we make. And in this room, when I'm thinking of land planning, I'm thinking generationally. You know, in the general plan, what are the seeds I want to plant for the next 3 generations so that they can then figure out what the next 3 generations after that need to do. We do that with our communities. You know, if we can figure out a way that we can have every type of housing choice in a master plan community, we've given everybody a chance to figure out what works for them. You know, at certain stages of life, we like the rural areas. At certain stages of life, we like the urban areas. But we're all different. And so in the land planning world, when we're working with private development, we have to figure out how do we meet the needs of the entire market to work. And that entire market, to me, is the community. We all make up the community. Our zoning is in place. It gives us regulatory, but our zoning is not in place to protect anybody's property. Our zoning is in place to promote and enhance the public health, safety, and welfare. We use that as a guide. We use it, what we can do with it, and it's a great tool. Zoning can be changed, and we can modify it. The communities I mentioned earlier that we work on have their own zoning, and they have their own development standards, and they can't be built anywhere else because none of the other municipalities allow for them. So if we really want to make a change in kind of the physical appearance of where we live, it's not the general plan, it's not the zoning, it's the standards, our subdivision standards, our street standards, our drainage standards, and how we can get those to be something that going forward we don't have to pay a fortune for, because as taxpayers, we're paying for it. We're paying for the maintenance of it long term. And so the more that we can plant the seeds for our kids, not to have to maintain what we built, but be able to prosper from it, the better off I think we are as a healthy community.
Patricia, 30 seconds.
So we're seeing the desire and need for open space coming to the forefront, but we also have to recognize that uncontrolled building sprawl, is a concern. So there are ideas out there that we're hoping the municipalities and the county will look at for cluster building density, so it leaves more open space, and it's a more structured way to help preserve, what's so beautiful about this valley, and also looking at other ways to provide affordable housing, which is something you'll find in Paulden and Chino Valley, but needs some work. Definitely needs some work.
Kimberly?
I think I gave a lot of answer in my last comment, and I think it really goes down to making sure you're engaging in the planning where you live and where you're interested. And And there isn't a right answer whether growth is going to happen in a municipality or in the county. It's going to happen where the economics say it's going to happen. And, you know, if it's cheaper to develop in a county and your parcel of land is in the county, that's where you're going to be. So I think it really depends on where the land is that you're looking at and the cost of development in those places. Whether it's right or wrong is not something that I feel like I get to decide.
And Ariana?
I think that supporting a healthy community design is really about balancing development with the protection of Arizona's unique biodiversity. So a healthy community is really going to look like something that's safe for both humans and wildlife, while minimizing conflict between human and wildlife interactions and also preserving connectivity. So it's about supporting Arizona's growth and economic development while also ensuring sustainability, diversity, and safe movement for wildlife populations.
All right, thanks to a great audience, thanks to a great panelist, thanks for being part of it. Over to Elijah.
Yes, we really do appreciate you guys coming out today. Your presence here helps us to get awareness out about what's really going on. At this time, we want to bring up our board here who helped put this together. Let's give these people a hand for putting on this event. We have Larry, we have Amora. And then we also want to give a big thank you to our panelists, lending your valuable time and expertise to make this possible. This is one of the first events where I learned anything about what's going on with public planning, and we're so grateful for your help. So let's give them a hand as well. We have a gift for them. Just as a thank you for their time. Now, there were some really good things said just now towards the end where Kimberly was mentioning the power and the impact that has on open space preservation, the impact that has on wildlife conservation. And then Bryn made an excellent point that no doesn't take us anywhere. And so coming up right now, Prescott Valley has an opportunity to do something about these issues. They have the opportunity to say yes to something that is going to actually move the needle in terms of open space preservation, wildlife and water conservation, attainable housing. And so that's saying yes on Proposition 492 in the November ballot. And if you want to make a difference on this thing, you want to learn what you can do, or you want to get more education about the topic, I encourage you to join us at the Protect PV Mixer. That's happening at the Warehouse Event Center in Prescott Valley right around 6 p.m. You want to come on out, have a drink, play some cornhole, learn more about the topic, and get involved. And so then the other thing we want to remind you of before we close is August, is it 25th? Here we are, August 25th, save the date. This is one of the most relevant and important topics that everybody has an opinion on, everybody has feelings on. And so if you want to hear from experts who are really dedicated to the issue, they know what's going on, they can help us make educated decisions as a community, I encourage you to save the date for August 25th. Our next Signature Series meeting is going to be all about water. And so thank you for coming out. We appreciate your time. Have a great day.